Welcome to Sensing the Signal. I'm Terry Patar from Atreides. We're exploring the overlap between data, technology and intelligence in our increasingly volatile and complex world, what this means for national security and how deeper insight can help organisations make better decisions. I've spent the past 20 years helping organisations improve their intelligence capabilities. I'm fascinated by how we understand the world around us. Now I get to talk to some of the leading voices who I've learned from myself. This time on Sensing the Signal, I'm joined by two guests from Stop the Traffik, which is a fascinating organisation that we're going to be talking about. Neil Giles, President of Stop the Traffik, and Alice Nottage, who's in charge of communications and marketing. It's really great to talk to you both. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while because Stop the Traffik is a really fascinating organisation in the way that you work. And I should say, for anybody listening, your focus is on countering human trafficking, right? And the way that you do that, though, is, I think, quite unique. And so I really wanted to get into talking about that and the way that you use technology and data in particular. So welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here. Maybe we could start off by, getting some introductions from yourselves, and you could let us know a little bit about how long you've been with the organisation, and then we could get into talking about the work that you do. So, Neil, if you wanted to start maybe, because I know you've been there a while.
Sure, thanks, Terry. So I came across Stop the Traffik in probably about 2007, 2008, while I was working with the UK's National Law Enforcement Agency, and that's my background. I joined the Met Police in London in the 1970s and subsequently served in the National Agency. Worked for about 38 years in law enforcement as an investigator. And I bumped into Stop the Traffik at an event where they were talking about human trafficking in a way that, as a law enforcement professional, had not resonated with me previously. And human trafficking wasn't a priority for UK policing back in the early 2000s. So it caught my attention, and I was dumb enough to go up to Ruth Durnley, who was the chief executive then, and ask about perhaps working together, law enforcement and Stop the Traffik.
And Alice, how long have you been with Stop the Traffik?
So I've been with Stop the Traffik since November of last year, fairly fresh to the organisation. But prior to that, I was working for 5 years up in Scotland in victim support services, and moved down to London and started working for a different anti-trafficking charity who shared the office, and then was very much drawn to Stop the Traffik, and I just loved it. It's been a new way of doing charity, and it's been really exciting to be part of, but learnt a lot as well.
Great. And so I mentioned that the way that Stop Traffik works is pretty unique. And I would love for you guys to maybe talk us through how you do what you do, and kind of for the audience maybe not be familiar with the organisation, kind of what your focus is and where you're putting your efforts in terms of trying to stop human trafficking, and kind of what that looks like in practice. So maybe, Neil, if you wanted to talk us through some of that, because I know you've obviously done it for a while and been involved in a lot of different campaigns and things like that. So it'd be great to get your take on what the organisation does firstly, and then we can get into talking about how it does it, and particularly how you use data.
Okay, so we're in the business of preventing human trafficking. We came to recognise that human trafficking is actually a business model, an errant business model. And that it relies upon three key elements. It needs to be able to recruit people from vulnerable communities, and someone in trafficking and exploitation doesn't last forever, so you need a pipeline. You need to be able to dip back in and recruit somebody else. You also need to make sure that the person who's falling out, for whatever reason, doesn't go back and poison the well. So you need to make sure they behave themselves and stay quiet.
You mean in terms of from the trafficker's perspective?
Yeah,
they've got to make 100%. Sure that they still have some control, I suppose, or some means of coercing people even after they've
100%.
I suppose stopped making money from them as an asset.
Yeah. So there's that recruitment pillar. Secondly, no one recruits anybody unless you've got a demand equation to deploy these people in. There's no point in transiting 10 people from Eastern Europe to the UK, and then when you get them here, start incurring costs without having given some thought to how you're going to use them and make money. So you've got to have a demand equation available to you as a trafficker business person. And then last but not least, it's about money. It's just about money. You make way more money from commercial sexual exploitation than you do from forced labour. Forced labour, often minimum wage jobs. So you can generate, I don't know, £100 a day maybe from someone in forced labour, maybe a bit more. So over the course of a week, maybe £600-700, you need to multiply that many times over for it to be lucrative. So you need a lot more people in forced labour to be a business that's making great money. In commercial sexual exploitation, the equation's different. In the UK, all of the evidence suggests that traffickers expect one person in commercial sexual exploitation to generate about 20,000 sterling as a baseline. North of that's good.
Wow. Okay. We're talking significant sums of money then.
Yeah, if you've got 4 people in commercial sexual exploitation, you've probably got to find a financial home for close to £100,000 a month.
Wow. And that, so as you said, you've got to find a home for it. That money's got to go somewhere. You've got to be able to pipe it through the financial system in some way. And does that also then come into the work that you guys do? Well, I know it does, and it'd be great to maybe explain for the audience how it does in terms of how you work with organisations to, figure out what is happening in terms of trafficking. So, where the activity's occurring, what kind of activities occurring, and who's involved. But then, I guess, B, working with other organisations to share that knowledge, share that information, to sort of make it more powerful, I suppose, in that sense. Maybe you could talk us through how that works as well for Stop the Traffik.
Sure. So in terms of the notion of prevention, you've got 3 pillars there that you've got to work to. How do you prevent people being trafficked from vulnerable communities? How do you reduce the vulnerability of sectors or demand in some way, shape or form? And lastly, how do you sensitise financial systems to be able to spot and stop the revenues from human trafficking? So 3 key equations. And without a shadow of a doubt, the kryptonite in all of those things is being able to get enough lived experience in some kind of classified format to be able to generate sufficient quality, rich picture to be able to make those prevention programs live for the various entities that you work with. And that's where my expertise as an intelligence professional kind of comes to a hard stop, and where Alice's abilities to turn what we know into a communications product really begins to take shape and roll.
So that's the interesting. I think having both of you in the room to talk to this whole subject is really interesting, because you can go through that full cycle of finding out what's going on, taking that. You described it there really well, Neil. I think lived experience, but then, as you said, classifying it, turning it into, data, in the sense of, once you're putting it into categories and you are classifying different elements and different parts of it, the who, the what, the where, the when, all those sorts of elements. And then once you've figured it out, I suppose, Alice, it comes round to you eventually in terms of pushing out communications to help target the activity in some way. I mean, maybe you can talk us through that part of the process.
Yeah, definitely. So there's our sort of general communications approach, which is obviously us having a platform, doing general public awareness, spot the signs, and making people not only understand and know more about trafficking, but trying to make people care about it. Yeah. But there is, I suppose, from this prevention side, one of the things that we do is prevention campaigns, which is where social media is utilised by traffickers. They use it a lot to reach those people, to recruit them. So it's a really key tool they have. So although we know that lots of people have lots of concerns about social media, what we try and do is flip that and use it to also reach those people, but with safety information. So we will use the same way, you might be targeted with ads for clothes you like or holidays, whatever it might be. We work with social media platforms to use that technology to do geo-targeted ads which reach people who are in at-risk communities for recruitment. And what we will do is we will work with NGOs on the ground. If I think about a recent campaign we did, which was around county lines in the UK, we did that in partnership with UK Youth and with Burger King, and we did a lot of work around engaging with young people to try and get content that's actually going to engage them. So it's not just us sending out a safety message, don't get trafficked. It's working with the group we're trying to reach in their terms, in their language, in a format that they're going to engage with. So we sort of did a video that was, I think there was Minecraft elements and things to really target it so that they actually do stop scrolling and look at it. So it's trying to engage them with something that is, actually, in some cases, we did a recent prevention campaign around Albanian men who were trafficked to the UK for construction. So starting off and using the same tactics, like, do you want a better life for yourself in the UK? And then actually it going on to be about the safety information and taking them to a web landing page that we've created that has lots of information, advice and links to different support services who can support them if they are at risk or are being trafficked or exploited. So it's taking that technology that traffickers use or that anyone uses to reach people in great quantities, but actually using it with messages for good and letting people know what to look out for and how to make safer decisions if they can.
So when you say, do you want a better life in the UK, is that sort of how the traffickers would start off trying to entice people in terms of the ad or the messages they're putting out on social media platforms?
Yeah, so I think that's sort of what we did in that case with Albania is we worked with NGOs on the ground and, made sure that we were working obviously with people who spoke the language and were able to use the right turns of phrase and thinking about the ads that were out there. So yeah, it was trying to mimic those. I think I've probably simplified it in terms of that, but trying to sort of, like you say, replicate it from intelligence we have on the ground. And I think that sort of comes back to that idea of what Neil does around the Traffic Analysis Hub and bringing data in from lived experience. We only know what's happening on the ground when we get those lived experience voices come in. So it's trying to use something that resonates with people. So
there's a huge amount of nuance involved there in terms of engaging with partners potentially or people who you're working with on the ground in the countries that some of these the people who are being trafficked are originating from before they come to the UK. And you're using that kind of, I suppose, local knowledge and that experience to help tailor the messages and make sure that it actually does resonate.
100%. I mean,
one thought that sprung to mind for me there was that's not something you can necessarily automate.
No.
So you need that knowledge and
And I think there was another example with when there was a lot of people in refugee camps as part of our Oman project who were being recruited for organ trafficking. Wow. So we learned from intelligence that a lot of what the traffickers were doing was when people agreed to sell their organs, they would have to pay, I think it was a $50 or €50 medically interested fee. So that is something that we might not have known about, but we know from the intelligence, so we can send out safety information that says, have you been asked to pay this? So trying to actually really make sure that we know what's happening, so that if we are arming people with information, it's as bespoke as it can be and as real to what is happening on the ground.
Yeah. So many things that I can follow up with on questions there, but one thing you mentioned was the Traffic Analysis Hub, and I'd love to get Neil for you to talk us through the Traffic Analysis Hub, what it is, how it works, because again, this is, I think, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you guys was that it's quite a unique setup that you've built over several years where, you've got this sort of repository of knowledge and data that involves working with a lot of partners as well. So it'd be great to just hear about all of that, really.
Sure. I mean, Traffic Analysis Hub is the largest repository of lived experience from all sources. and it's available to not-for-profits and government entities. We make no charge for that, and it was built beneficially originally by the IBM Corporation, and they put many millions of dollars worth of build into this, and then donated it lock, stock, and barrel to us.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And we're still upgrading it and maintaining it today. But its genesis was 15 years ago. I took some time out and went with Stop the Traffik out to Southwest Asia. Moderately amusingly, I remember having a conversation with some friends to say I'm going out to Mumbai to work with Stop the Traffik, and the guy looked at me and said, "How on earth do you expect to stop traffic in Mumbai?" I had to explain.
Right. Yes.
But essentially, part of that visit, I spent some time in a safe house where there were a number of victims of trafficking who'd essentially been evicted from the brothels where they'd been exploited, some of them for decades, some of them since early teenage years. And they were being taught to sew and do other work with garments so that they could sustain themselves in the next phase of their lives. They've been entirely reliant on the exploiters to that point in their lives.
So they'd been taken in by sort of a local organisation that was helping them.
NGO on the ground, one of the partner entities that we work with, There are hundreds of them around the world, and they do great work. And I was having interpreted to me their stories, where, when, how they've been recruited, the journeys they'd taken into exploitation, the kind of stories that their families had been told about this great opportunity they were going to, and then what that turned into, and how the money worked and how the trafficking and exploitation worked. And having heard this 2 or 3 times, I was prompted to ask the question of the NGO, where are these stories recorded? These are massively influential in helping us to understand how we need to work, where we need to work, and when. And of course, no one had ever thought of keeping a record of any of these stories. So for the next X number of years, we were on a journey to kind of build trust in the concept of recording and sharing these stories in a safe way, making sure there were no personal identities involved in this so that we could protect the innocent.
Yeah, it has to be anonymised.
But ultimately, there's great power in those lived experience narratives, particularly if you can bring them together in sufficient quantity to begin to build an analysis that's meaningful. Yeah. And then IBM stepped into the fray and with early AI began to build a platform that could bring in from open source around the world. And at the same time, we have a practice that works to build trust with NGOs, and they share the debriefs of the work they do with survivors. And over the last 7 or 8 years, that's turned into a hugely meaningful corpus of data that is filterable. We'll offer a representation of the data that works for an individual organisation in a part of the world that aids their work. It aids our work, helps us to build these prevent programs in ways that previously we're not able to do, and helps generate reporting. You know, we produce strategic analysis as well as tactical reporting to take organisations of every description, government policy entities, law enforcement, businesses, particularly regulated businesses who have a requirement to deliver anti-money laundering practice, or policies that are in line with modern slavery legislation around the world. We're able to feed an understanding of how that needs to be shaped and delivered.
Yeah, that's incredible. And within all of that, so sharing that knowledge and that data, that obviously involves building partnerships and trust with lots of different organisations. And I guess it comes back to one of those 3 pillars you mentioned in terms of the money and working with maybe financial institutions. Are you as an organisation able to have a lot of impact there in terms of some of that financial sector involvement, where you're able to maybe push out some of that information to them they can then use that on their side, and without perhaps revealing necessarily what they're doing openly or whatever, but maybe they can take action if they know, okay, here are some of the signs that we should be looking for, etc. They can update their processes, I suppose, to help them identify where money might be coming from sources such as trafficking.
Yeah, for sure. Controls is the operative word in financial circles. They're all required by regulators to have the right financial controls in place to ensure they're not laundering the proceeds of crime. And of course, every cent, every penny generated by human trafficking, when it hits a bank, is money laundering. That's whether you're the biggest corporate in the world or whether you're an exploiter with an individual in commercial sexual exploitation. And so we help financial institutions, and we have a number of partners, some of them very long-standing, household names that we share tactical intelligence with. So this can be a clue that says, Neil Giles is a trafficker. I hasten to add he's not. Right. And this is what he's doing, and this is how you might find a trace of him and his business in your records. All the way through to these are the red flag patterns that you might see from someone who's engaging in this kind of trafficking activity. And of course, that varies depending upon the activity and the part of the world that the individual's working in. But we can help build those controls, but we can also share really pointy intelligence that helps a financial institution identify a bad actor or a bad business and be able to take action in accordance with the local regulations, report that to law enforcement. Some parts of the world, getting a suspicious activity report about money laundering activity is more likely to get a law enforcement response than if you walked into the police station and said, this is happening around the corner.
Yeah, and I guess with law enforcement, you mentioned that early in your career, trafficking probably wasn't as big a priority as maybe it is now. But have you seen that shift, and have you seen that change in terms of when you are engaging law enforcement now, that they are more interested in taking on cases or taking perhaps intelligence from yourselves based on all of that sort of data that you've gathered, and using it to have some sort of effect?
We have significant relationships now with law enforcement, both nationally and globally. Interpol headquarters have been remarkable partners with us for more than 6 years. And law enforcement in the UK has had human trafficking as a priority now for more than 15 years. And there are some brilliant units out there that specialise in investigating it. The National Crime Agency are open to hearing from us when we share intelligence material with them. So, it's an increasingly open environment to the work that we do. You have to build trust even with those entities.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, I guess trust is key for the work that you're doing, but I guess they must also be able to see the value in the data that you've got in the hub, in the sense of, like you said before, there's that mass of data, and you're able to then pull out patterns and trends and maybe identify things that could forewarn them about what might be happening further down the line and where they might want to focus their resuresources.
Well, you can't stop what you can't see. So that's kind of like a bit of a mantra within Stop the Traffik, which is having all that data. It's such a key part of prevention, because you're building a picture of what's happening, and you can only stop it if you know what's happening. So it all sort of feeds into that. And I think, quite often we work with these banks, these businesses, and it's not a case of do they have it, it's they do. Let's find it, let's uproot it, let's help them to dismantle it within their own supply chains and things. Because it is such a huge business, it's global, it is, if you look hard enough, you'll probably find it in most places. So it's trying to sort of unearth it.
Yeah, and what have the trends been, I suppose, or how have things changed in terms of the ways in which you're collecting information about where trafficking is happening and how it's happening? Are there sort of newer methods traffickers are using to recruit people, or even where the victims of trafficking maybe are trying to sort of seek help? Is that something that you're seeing changes in, or is that sort of still happening in ways that you've seen sort of over the years, time and time again?
Everything's cultural and contextual.
Right.
And trafficking is a business like any other business. It constantly learns and adjusts to operate in a way that protects the traffickers from the forces of law enforcement, because whilst they certainly fear prosecution, it's not an everyday worry for them because there are way more traffickers than it's possible to prosecute. I think that was my early learning. It's just a bigger problem than the justice process can ever eat.
Wow. But then does that also sort of, is that the same essentially for the financial sector in terms of the money, that the traffickers are always looking for more ways or the new ways to beat whatever countermeasures might be put in place to, identify and stop their money? Is that stuff that you guys see as well?
Yeah, it's tradecraft on their part. And they have their own intelligence sharing network amongst themselves. So they learn from each other. If a new financial institution appears on the horizon, maybe a fintech or some other facility for enabling the movement and access to money, then the bad guys will be on it like a shot. And you just have to understand that. Yeah. It's a dynamic world that they work in. One of the nice parts about our historic data is that you can begin to spot the patterns changing. You can begin to spot how they advertise people differently in commercial sexual exploitation, adult service websites. You can plot the way that trends change to appeal to the customer. You can see that as prices march on, how more and more traffickers will take payment by card payment systems or online systems or other than cash, although cash is still part of the equation.
Wow.
And, it's a constant case of improving the level of vigilance by sharing how these changes are beginning to manifest themselves. Yes, we're always playing catch up. They're always a little bit ahead of us. But we're getting sharper at how we are able to generate reporting that sharpens the detection focus within financial institutions and elsewhere.
And what's changed for Stop the Traffik in terms of the ways that you need to analyse the data that you're getting, or even collect the data? I imagine there's a process there as well of having to sort of adapt to, the sort of changes you might see in terms of how they're sharing information or how they're using information, how they're putting it online. Maybe some of the social media platforms are different, or, the type of information you're gathering, does that change? And do you therefore have to sort of come up with new methods of analysis for it?
It's a constant investment process.
Right.
We are very fortunate in that a lot of tech businesses have been very kind to us. They loan us high-end developers. They loan us time and space and platforms to work with, and that helps our in-house data team keep generally up to speed with both the quality and operation of the platform. And of course, at the same time, new opportunities are constantly coming on stream for traffickers and customers of trafficking entities. The review sites for people who buy sex. We don't for a moment say that all purchase of sex is from exploited people, but a significant proportion of it is.
Right.
And the review sites can often be really explicit. So tell us what services were available, how much was paid, how it was paid, was it good value or not. Some of the customers are really quite open with details of their experience, almost like you would do on TripAdvisor for a restaurant you just went to, which often strikes me as bizarre. But we're able to see that because it's public material. and we're able to take an understanding from that, play it against the other data that we've got, and be able to continually update the marketplace that we're talking to, financial institutions, regulated businesses, people who are in short-term letting businesses are really important to traffickers.
Right.
They need places to take their people to stay when they're selling their wares.
Yeah.
So these are legitimate entities for us to share data with.
How do people get moved around when it comes to trafficking? Because I know some people will be listening to this and they'll be thinking in their minds, they'll have a vision of people being kind of illicitly moved in the back of lorries, etc. The small boats thing will spring to mind because it's so prevalent in the news at the moment. It's such a big political issue. Is that how people are moved when they're trafficked or not?
In some parts of the world, yes.
Right.
Once, if you're in high-end commercial sexual exploitation, you're going to fly. Quite
regular
normally,
travel.
Regular travel with your passport.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the people in that business would not admit that they were in exploitation. Often when you talk to survivors after they've become free of exploitation, the enormity of their of the life before dawns on them, and that's when some of them become wonderful advocates for the exploited community, and we learn a lot from those guys, and many of them are becoming leaders in the anti-trafficking world.
And I think at the time there will be some, like you said, who don't recognise what they're being in as being exploitation. Because I think one of the sort of things that I learned when I joined Stop the Traffik, or sort of it dispelled in my mind, was trafficking isn't always happening by people who you're unknown to. Often it can be within families, or it can be boyfriends who are trafficking their girlfriends. And if that is a situation, it can be a lot harder to maybe recognise that you're in that situation, that you're being trafficked, you're being exploited, which can make it then harder for that person to leave, to find support, and often can lead to them being re-trafficked. So I think sometimes the ideas or views people might have about trafficking and it, conflating it with people smuggling, or it's not to say that that isn't happening, people aren't being trafficked in that way, but that can be a lot more insidious and can be happening in ways that feel a lot more covert. So I think that's a really important thing to recognise.
Yeah, I definitely think people people who are outside of this sector and aren't familiar with the work you're doing, that definitely would be a surprise. Like you said, not just yourself coming into it brand new, but for everybody, I think,
100%.
You wouldn't necessarily think about that straight away at all. Are there particular geographic areas as well that are sort of focuses of this activity and maybe where you're looking at in terms of resources, or is it just such a massive global issue that you're kind of almost having to look across the world at where people might be coming from and being trafficked to, etc.?
It's a global problem. It's said there are circa 50 million people around the world that are in circumstances of exploitation. It's an industry that generates at least $500 billion a year in revenues. In the UK, we would say it's probably north of 12 billion sterling. You could fill Wembley Stadium twice over with the number of victims in the UK. It's about 160,000. And all of that money pretty much goes through financial institutions, largely unseen. The level of suspicious activity reports from financial institutions to the national reporting portals that exist around the world are pretty low in comparison with other crime types. It's hard to see for banks and other financial institutions. So it's improving. And we think we're a part of that improvement profile, but there's way more to do. So it's big and insidious, and we try to work where we're strong, where we've got partners on the ground that we can work with effectively. There is little point in running a communications program in a vulnerable community if you're not working with someone that's accessible locally with the right kind of trust to deflect people from a journey of risk that they might start out very hopefully thinking this is going to be a great new future that turns to something much more uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's and can you give us an example maybe of a recent sort of case study or somewhere where you've worked that, you know, you've had some success in terms of being able to achieve that, you know, working with a local partner or running a campaign where you've managed to sort of, I suppose, deflect people from that path that they otherwise would have gone on?
I suppose the most recent one that's fresh in my mind is the one with Burger King and UK Youth, which was in the UK. And we reached over 380,000 young people with safety information. And through the surveys and engagement we did, over 50% recognised that they were at risk or they knew someone who was. So it's actually, that's quite a sort of stark number of all the young people we engaged with that felt that they or their friend or family could be at risk of being, you know, trafficked into criminal exploitation.
Wow. And is it harder almost to intervene in cases where people are being exploited or trafficked within a country versus when they're having to cross a border? Like, does that sort of cross-border travel provide an opportunity for the authorities to maybe identify where it's happening, or is that not really a factor in terms of detection and prevention?
I don't think it is a huge factor. Largely, why would you take someone across a border?
Yeah.
It takes someone away from what they're used to, their family, their community. Often it delivers a language barrier. So if you've got someone in the UK that only speaks Moldovan and doesn't speak English, they are completely reliant on their trafficker.
Yeah.
That's a perfect storm for the trafficker to manage. In the circumstance that Alice was just talking about, if you're a young person in the UK that's in exploitation, the trafficker's got to deploy other controls.
Right.
And that's often debt, fear of violence, fear that there'll be violence visited upon family, and a whole load of other controls need to be put in place. It's just about developing controls.
Yeah.
And a lot of those, you know, actually when people are trafficked across borders, then quite often what will happen is they'll end up in sort of a debt bondage relationship where they've maybe asked to be taken across a border to the UK and then they'll be levied with this sort of impossible debt that never goes away. They're forced to stay in exploitation, not through being physically forced or manoeuvred, but actually because they're being told, well, you still owe us for this. And now with interest, you continue to owe us. And, you know, they'll threaten them otherwise. So there can be, debt bondage is a really big thing within trafficking, and I suppose can be a key thing when we talk about people being trafficked across borders.
And for those, and then I suppose on the other side, for those young people that you're trying to reach here in the UK, but I suppose also as well for people in other parts of the world where, you know, you mentioned before, you have to craft quite nuanced campaigns and messages working with local partners. Is it? I take it it's the same as well when you're trying to reach a particular demographic group, in this case maybe young people in the UK, and
Definitely.
And so how does that work, and what sort of platforms do you have to use? And I mean, obviously social media is a big part of it, but you know, are you having to constantly adapt to where people are active online, etc.?
Definitely. I mean, when we did the one with young people in the UK, we worked with UK Youth and loads of young people directly, and we're planning over the next 12 months to really level up our youth-focused work, because that's a key area with, you know, young people online, having lots of unfiltered access to everything. And to, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I was out in schools doing some workshops with students around online safety, how to spot green flags, red flags in accounts, and a little bit with them about what exploitation is and how to spot the signs. And the amount of children in these classes who firstly gave us real insights into actually what it's like to be online and the platforms they're using, how they interact. So many of them spoke about, you know, they're speaking online to people they have never met. And that is really commonplace. You know, it's not the odd kid who's doing that. From those workshops, at least, it seemed like swathes of the classroom were like, you know, they're a friend of a friend of a friend, but I've never met them. And it's like, how do you manage and make sure that children have the sort of media literacy or IT literacy to navigate that and navigate that as sensibly as they can and safely. So I think over the next 12 months, we'll be doing a lot around youth and levelling up that. And the best way we can do that is by getting out there and speaking with youth directly and hearing from them, because they're the real experts of their experience, and they know what it's like to be online as a 14, 15-year-old much better than you or I probably do.
I guess it's the same for communities abroad, where you're talking about people who maybe want to come to the UK to have a better life, etc. Their lived experience may be something that's completely surprising for us sitting here and looking at it, and until you go out and collect that information, or you speak to organisations in those countries or on the ground or interview people, you don't necessarily know what to look for, I suppose, or how to prevent it. Yeah,
I think when we did some work around a prevention campaign in Ukraine, we realised that people were obviously being displaced, and when they were getting to borders, there was lots of vans picking people up. And some of those vans were genuinely good people looking to help people. Others were traffickers. So we did a prevention campaign around that, which wasn't saying, don't get trafficked, don't get in a van, because we're talking about people who didn't really have choices here. So it's about trying to, make them make the safest choice they can. So our campaign around that was, if you are going to get into a van, ask the driver his name, get a photo, picture of his licence, and a picture of the vehicle's driving licence, registration number. So it's about, and then actually I think that went really well, and
share that with your network online before you get in it.
And that's something that if they try doing that, or if at that point they try doing that and they say to the driver, who's ostensibly somebody who's volunteered to come and pick up somebody who's in need and help them out, if they refuse to do that, then that's a definite sign they shouldn't get in the vehicle.
Yeah,
was that
was our message. If someone is there to help, the likelihood is they'll have no problem with you documenting what car you've been in. If someone's there with an ulterior motive, the likelihood is they're not going to want to be photographed, and they're not going to want their registration number to be held somewhere or shared with your network. So again, it's these people are in really difficult situations, and I think so sometimes it's about making the best choice you can in a difficult situation.
And that's presumably a campaign you had to set up at pretty short notice and very rapidly. How do you go about sort of identifying, okay, how do we reach people and how do we do it quickly in that sort of situation? Or do you rely on your existing knowledge of, okay, well, this is how we reach people in that area?
It was because it was such an acute situation when the invasion of Ukraine occurred and this exodus began. It was mainly women and children that were leaving. Women and children in the traffic set are disproportionately represented. So there's way more women and children in exploitation around the world. Huge red flag. But at the same time, because of the scale of the problem, it attracted a lot of NGOs to get out there on the ground and to work with us in ways that were really helpful. Ukrainian law enforcement and border forces were really stretched. But there were a lot of NGOs from around the world that got themselves busy, were happy to form coalitions with us and with others in ways that helped us dynamically share what was happening and where it was happening, in ways that we could, again, turn around into messaging that helped articulate risk for people whose only method of communication was often just on social media. So Facebook, Instagram, TikTok are the ways that people were communicating with one another, and we were able to use that to give them safety messages that reached, literally millions of people.
Wow.
During about a 6-month period.
Yeah, that's incredible. Yeah, and I suppose that's a situation that arose unexpectedly, but you're obviously also working towards cases where you sort of can see a situation developing, something that's likely to occur where you want to get ahead of it, and you're presumably preparing for that and starting to work on those relationships and partnerships and sharing information. And I know we've talked already prior to this about the World Cup next year in 2026 being a big one. Maybe you guys can talk a little bit about that and kind of what goes into preparing for events like that. And because I think it will be a real surprise to people, again, who don't necessarily have a lot of familiarity with the sector you're working in, how big a deal those sorts of events can be when it comes to creating a spike in the level of trafficking?
So you have to look at this through the eyes of the trafficker business. They'll be doing their market research for opportunities, and events bring a lot of visitors to a place for a period of time. And there are events that attract people with more money than perhaps other events, so that that would immediately put it further up the league table of something that, as a trafficker, you might be interested in looking at. Something like the World Cup or the Olympics, yes, it attracts spectators. Often those spectators are corporate visitors, are corporate packages, are guests of sponsors, etc. That's a prime market for a trafficker group, particularly for commercial sexual exploitation. The setup, the takedown, the leisure bulge that occurs, the catering bulge that occurs, those are all opportunities for trafficking for labour.
Right.
Short term, quick hit. But the sex market is the one that makes the money in and around those things. We first set out on this after seeing a lot of attention in the US around Super Bowl.
Okay, interesting.
And that's been a focus for anti-trafficking entities in the States for quite a while. So we took that model and looked at the Qatar World Cup.
Right.
And we saw a lot of external arrivals into Qatar and the surrounding Emirates during that period, offering themselves on adult service websites, selling sex. And we saw a particular price spike for the period immediately before, during and after that World Cup. We reported that, took that learning towards the Paris Olympics, and were able to baseline that almost a year before the Games. So took a baseline snapshot of the offering on adult service websites and review sites, and then followed that up about 9 months later and saw a significant change in the advertising environment. Concerning signals, out of country cell phone numbers, a range of nationalities that hadn't been there before, significant increase of people from Latin America, Eastern Europe and further afield.
And are those the traffickers you're looking at, or is it the customers?
No, this is what the traffickers are advertising. So they advertise,
Right.
girl from Brazil.
Got it. Okay.
And we saw an uncomfortable trend towards advertising ever younger individuals for sex. So the word young, fresh, teen, etc. appearing more routinely. There's clearly a sense in trafficker thinking that the market for sex is more interested in younger and younger people. Whether or not they're actually delivering that is for investigations to discover in time. But we're seeing that drift. We're seeing prices spike too. We were seeing €3,000 a night, 300 euros an hour routinely being sought and probably paid. So it's an interesting market experiment, and it's one that we're becoming very prepared for the Mexico, US, Canada World Cup next year.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, because with that, you've got 3 countries involved. You've got a much bigger geographic spread than you would have had somewhere like Qatar or with the Paris Olympics. You know, this is it seems like a much bigger challenge. And is that something that then requires more resources, more work from yourselves in terms of tracking that activity, and then I suppose crafting the campaigns that you're going to push out? Is that, how is all of that kind of lining up for yourselves in terms of the next 12 months? Because that sounds like a huge amount of work.
We have a baseline response in terms of our ability to collect data, to analyse that, to share that in both a strategic sense, what's happening, where's it happening, how's it happening, but also to share tactical material for both law enforcement and regulated businesses to be able to chew on, and to find opportunities to restrict, reduce, prevent, and investigate. All those things we're able to do in some part. We're restrained by resources, of course. We're not going to be able to do everything that we would like to. There are already multiple partnerships in existence out there, and we're a party to some of those. So we're talking to organising committees already, and we've begun to conduct baseline assessments. But yeah, we'll do as much as we can with the resources that we've got. The problem is likely to outstrip our ability to manage.
Wow.
And I think one of the big things is about how in the run-up we're going to engage with the businesses and financial institutions, because a key driver for this is how do we disrupt the money flow? Because as Neil sort of said, this is, for traffickers, it's an incredibly lucrative period they could be coming into. So I think our key tactic and driver is how do we disrupt the money flow? Because I think a lot of the time, obviously trafficking and exploitation is horrid, but you're not going to appeal to the better nature or the empathy of a trafficker. But what you can do is you can undermine their business model, because ultimately for them, I think it's about reframing it. It's not people necessarily doing things to be vindictive, they're doing it to make money. So if you can undermine that, that's probably going to be the most effective means of disrupting exploitation and protecting people.
Yeah. This is hopefully a deliberately naive question, but is there more you can do through communications to not just raise awareness, but actually influence behaviour and reduce the risks? Or is that difficult to achieve?
I think it's the targeted prevention campaigns, which are, like, say, safety information targeted at specific groups. There's the bigger comms piece around making sure that we're, online, we have a presence, we do blogs, we do social media posts, which are about raising awareness of the issue. And a lot of it as well, a key part of our comms is about building relationships and partnerships and trust across the sector, and not just across the sector, but across multiple sectors, getting people to understand more about it so that they can identify it and see it. And one of the big things we have, which I suppose we haven't really spoke to, was we have the Stop app, which is an app we have which allows people to report anonymously if they are concerned about exploitation. So it might be that you're in a nail bar and you think, you see a couple of the signs and you think, actually, this looks like there might be exploitation happening. We have this Stop app, which also all the data from that goes into our traffic analysis hub and becomes another vehicle for us to see a bigger picture of what's going on. So that's another tool we do, I suppose, in making people aware of that and trying to communicate that to people so we can get more reports and get more intelligence. But yeah, it's the communications is a key part of this, but it's sort of a challenge as well. And I think one of the biggest challenges I found in working in this sector is trying to make people care. The general public care about it, because often I think the perception people might have is that trafficking is happening far away into someone else. And that's not true. It's happening in the UK, it's happening around the corner, and it can happen to anyone. And I think one of the big things is, it's traffickers, as Neil has articulated so much, it's a highly sophisticated business model. And it can happen to anyone. It can happen to people, who have degrees, who have all these different things that you might think prevent you from being someone who would fall victim to trafficking or exploitation. So I think that's a big challenge I find, I suppose, in communicating our work, is trying to make people care and understand that it can happen to anyone.
And it relates back to what you were saying about from the communications perspective, you're not just trying to push a message out, you're also often trying to gather information coming in,
100%.
Whether it's via the Stop app, whether it's via referrals or, people contacting other organisations or the authorities or whatever to say, there may be a victim of trafficking here, or I may be a victim of trafficking. That must be, again, really difficult, because people, like you said before, people don't realise that sometimes they are being trafficked, and people don't realise that other people are being trafficked. So there's all this sort of activity that's going on almost in plain sight, but people aren't always aware of it and picking up on it. And that's, I think, what's most remarkable about this area in some ways, is that so much of it is happening, and people aren't aware of it. And Neil, you said £12 billion is being made on this from this sector every year in the UK. I mean, we're talking huge sums of money. This is not a small issue. So, I mean, the work you guys are doing is fantastic, and I think the way you're doing it is incredible as well, bringing together all of that information, all of that data, but then all of the partners and the organisations that you're connecting into the hub and giving that out to people, and then the campaigns as well to try and get those responses. Is there anything you think that is going to change necessarily in the next sort of, I guess, 12 months or beyond, not just in terms of what you're looking at, but is there anything on the horizon in terms of legislation or anything like that is going to affect the sector or make it easier for you guys to operate or have more of an impact?
I suppose there are two avenues. Legislation and regulation continues to grow incrementally around the world. More and more countries are looking at similar to our Modern Slavery Act here in the UK, similar legislation, which is helpful. The US has had a different approach to this. They have other legislation that's proved to be really impactful, so that will continue to grow. I think the piece that's always interesting to me is how the not-for-profit sector bands together, increasingly shares tactical and strategic work going forward. We've talked about the scale of the World Cup Challenge next year in those three countries, and the fact that we're unlikely to be able to service that ourselves. But there are a lot of other entities out there that will do a piece of that. And the more that we can share understanding with them to help them fashion their messaging, the stronger the opportunity for us to change the paradigm is. So I think that that increasing journey to collaboration is hugely important, and we'll keep feeding the policy machine as much as it's prepared to eat the product that we can churn out.
Yeah.
And I think there's also been a bigger appetite for prevention. And I think sometimes there's been a sense of people are drawn to or appeal to the sort of pulling people out the river. And there is still an absolute necessity and need for that in place. But it's harder to tell the story of what didn't happen.
Right.
So I think as well, and I think there has been a shift generally in people being more keen to do prevention work because ultimately
stop people falling into the river in the first place.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But it can be a harder sell sometimes,
Wow. Well, as I said, I think the work that Stop the Traffik is doing is amazing, especially with the resources you've got and everything you're having an impact on around the world, not just in the UK, but globally. Where can people go to find out more and to learn more about what the work of the organisation is?
So they can find us on our website. And if you just Google Stop the Traffik, all capitals, and with a K instead of a CK, you can find us on socials as well, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, everything.
And people can find the Stop app online.
Yes,
and that helps if they want to report.
Yeah, if you go onto the App Store, you can download the Stop app. And if you're not sure about that, you can go onto our website and that'll give you a link to how to do it as well, and a video which explains a bit more about it, which might be helpful.
Great. Okay. Thanks, guys, for coming in and into the studio and talking and sharing your time today. This has been fascinating. Thanks again. I look forward to following up. Maybe we can do a follow-up episode when the World Cup rolls around and we can see what's going on then. And it'd be great to talk to you about how things have developed at that point.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. You can't stop what you can't see. I think Alice really nailed it when she said that, because this is a problem that is occurring in plain sight, and yet we don't see it. I think what's come out for me particularly strongly in the work of Stop the Traffik and the conversation I've just had with Neil and with Alice is that it actually gives us some hope. It gives us some hope that there is somebody there doing something about this and doing it in a way that is actually having an impact, and that they're using techniques and they're using analysis and data in a way that otherwise we wouldn't have any understanding necessarily of what was going on. They're actually tackling this problem at scale. And that does give me a little bit of hope. Sensing the Signal is brought to you by Atreides, the behavioural analytics company. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find out more about what we do at atreides.io.